Hey, all, every once in a while, we take your questions here on the Russell Moore Show. And just a reminder, you can send your question to me about anything that you're wondering about, maybe something in the Bible, something in the culture, something in your life, a decision you're trying to make, and you're trying to think through, is this really the right thing? I did this just literally right before I came on this show talking to a friend and saying, "Hey, I think I made the right decision here. What do you think about a really minor sort of family thing?" But I needed somebody to tell me, I think you're wrong. You should do it the other way." And so
But did you
you
send
could.
it in a voice memo,
I did
Russell?
not send it in a voice memo. I talked to this person face to face, but we would like for you to send your question in a voice memo. You don't have to, but it sure does help me to pick up all kinds of things that just can't come across in just text in an
Mm-hmm.
email. So send that to us at questions@russellmoore.com. And we have with us, as always, our producer here at the Russell Moore Show, Leslie Thompson. Leslie, I'm wondering if we have questions today. If we don't, then I guess we'll just
Well, it
try
is
to
a
sing
week
or
where we've got
something.
a question.
Oh, we
Did you say
do.
you're going to sing?
Well, we'll find
What
something to
would your
do.
choice be? What's karaoke with
Walk the
Russell Moore?
line.
Oh,
Yeah.
in the same key?
No, I probably
Okay.
couldn't do that.
All right. Well, we do, in fact, have a question with a voice memo from Sharon about communion. And I think a lot of people will resonate with this question. So here we
Okay.
go.
Hi, Russell. I have a question related to communion. I have been attending a church for a couple of years when they announced that only members of their church could now participate in communion. I was taken aback. I thought communion among believers, as opposed to members, united us under Christ, who is the head. I was not a member, and it felt as if they were discounting my personal proclamation of faith. Your thoughts, please?
Okay. Well, what I would say to that is you have to keep in mind that biblically there are two aspects of the Lord's table that seem to be contradictory. So, on the one hand, what the Lord's table does is to unite the body of Christ. So, Paul will talk about, for instance, there's one loaf, one cup, and one body, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. So there's that aspect of it, which it sounds like is what you're emphasizing here. And then there's the other aspect that has to do with what people used to call the fencing of the table. In other words, to say the boundaries of the table, because uh, there is a there's a responsibility in the New Testament to make sure that the Lord's table is being taken worthily, to use the language that Paul is taking. So that means it's not just about the individual and about the individual's relationship to Christ, but about the community's recognition of that believer's place within the body of Christ. So if you look at, I come out of the Baptist tradition. We've had multiple different viewpoints on communion, but for the most part, have had a consensus that only people who are baptized as believers, as by immersion, are welcome to the table. It doesn't mean that those churches believe that everybody else is not a Christian. What they're doing is to say the historic Christian view in every wing of the church is that baptism is a prerequisite to the Lord's table. That's true in Roman Catholicism. That's true in Eastern Orthodoxy. That's true in virtually every wing of Protestantism. And so the debate then is, well, what is baptism? You add to that that you have a situation where it sounds like what this congregation is doing is saying we want to make sure that the people who are coming to communion actually have an accountability to us, because what what the what the invitation to the Lord's table implies is that it can be withheld. So that if you have 1 Corinthians chapter 5, for instance, you have this person who is in this scandalous pattern of sin in the Corinthian church. Paul says you are to treat him as an unbeliever, not to even to eat with such a one. Okay, so that means that there has to be a mechanism to do that. This congregation, it sounds like, is making the determination that that's the best way that they can do it. So I would not, I'm in, I've been in churches. I'm in a church right now where would I say that the way that we do communion, which is a lot more open than what you're talking about here, would be the ideal New Testament pattern? No. Does it upset me? No. And why is that? It's because it's a recognition that we're in a place where the church is fragmented, not our church locally, but the church, Big C church, is fragmented and broken in such a way that we don't have consensus on baptism in the Big C church. We don't have consensus on exactly what church membership ought to look like. So we err on the side of breadth, which is, I think, the right decision for that congregation at this time. And I think it may be that the congregation you're visiting is making the right decision for them at this time. I would not take that personally. And as a matter of fact, I would almost take that to be a good sign in a time when people have so diminished what the Lord's table is about to, well, this is just your way of reminding yourself that Jesus died for you, which of course is not what is in the New Testament. The fact that they're taking that seriously would be a good sign, even if you conclude, well, I think they're taking it too far. See, so I wouldn't become angry about that.
What if someone like Sharon is going to a church that she's not sure that she wants to become a member and yet is not being um, is not welcomed at the table? What I mean, should she consider going to another church or just not obviously not take communion while she's there? I'm sensing also this tension of what do I do personally to involve myself in this practice, this spiritual practice?
Well, I mean, it's the if you're at someone else's church where you're not a member, you're not accountable to them, they're not accountable to you, then you're a guest at that place. In the
Mm.
same way that if I go over to your house and you say to me, here we eat dessert before we eat the main course. Okay. I mean, I guess that's what you do. Maybe it's not the way I would do it, but it's your house. So I think you would then have to what Sharon would have to do is to say, are my views of the Lord's Supper so discordant with this congregation's that I couldn't in good conscience exist in that context? And if so, well, then go to a different church. But I think what you ought to remove immediately is the sense of out out. And I'm not saying she's outraged, but sometimes people are. How dare you tell me that I can't
Right.
come
Yeah.
here in
Mhm.
either direction? In the same way that I mean, it would be really ridiculous for me as a sort of a closer in communion Baptistic guy to say to my congregation, which is multi-denominational and much broader on that point than I to say, oh, how dare all these how dare all these people who haven't been properly baptized coming to the table? Well, that's
Yeah.
not, that's not what our
Mm-hmm.
congregation has decided is we don't have a consensus right now
Mm-hmm.
on what baptism looks like, and we're willing to bear with one another on that. The congregation has decided that, and for me to have some sort of I mean, I'm not tempted toward having that, but if I were to have some sort of, I can't believe this is not being done my way,
Mm-hmm.
would not be good. And that's especially true if what you're doing is saying, they're excluding me from the table as though what they're doing is saying, um, we don't recognize you as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can may have come out of a church where that's what communion meant.
Mm.
Anybody who can come to the table is anybody that we recognize as a Christian. That's not what this congregation sees as their responsibility before God to be able to say, here are the people that we admitted to the table and have responsibility over communing with one another. Well,
Hmm.
that's you might not agree with that view, but it's not a crazy view, and it's certainly not a rude view. So I would take
Yeah.
that off the table, and just decide the way that I would with anything else. Can I uh, can I live with that without being a disruptive force in the
Yeah.
congregation? And I mean, there are always going to be, for most people, there are always going to be all kinds of things that we say. If somebody said you're starting over and you're starting an entirely different church that is the Russell Moore Community Church, and you do everything the way that you think it ought to be done, well, okay, I could sit down and construct that kind of a church, but I wouldn't want to belong to it. Uh,
What
but
happens
that's
if there's a schism?
but yeah, but that's yeah. Then you need to see a therapist. Uh, but you don't. But that's not what in every congregation we're able to say. Okay, here are some things that I can't bear with. If
Mm-hmm.
my congregation sacrifices a goat, uh, that I'm that's I can't do that. If my congregation um, if my congregation says we're not going to practice baptism in the Lord's Supper, I can't do that. But then there are all kinds of things where you will say, maybe I wouldn't do deacon elections every year with term limits of 2 years or whatever it is your congregation does. But it's not something heretical or evil. You're able to say, I can live with that. I,
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to determine where those boundaries are for you, and what doesn't come from faith is sin. So if Sharon feels like being a part of a congregation that does fence the table that closely, it would cause her to sin against her own conscience, then she shouldn't join that congregation.
Mm-hmm.
But she also ought to recognize, I can't insist that the congregation do something that they think would be wrong before God.
This is reminding me of the listener question about infant baptism. That
Yeah,
was almost the same. It got down to the same sort of response on in the role of the congregant
yeah.
is conscience and a
Yeah, and
personal decision.
it's kind of it's the same thing. Is we can have this idea that, and a lot, I mean, we're all affected and shaped and formed by our the as Romans 12 would put it, the world around us. And I don't just mean in sinful ways, but in all kinds of ways. And it's easy to say, if somebody who by conviction believes in infant baptism goes to a Baptistic church and says they've rejected my baby
Mm-hmm.
by
Mm.
refusing to baptize. Well, no, they haven't rejected your baby. They don't. they don't think that's baptism, and they think if they were to do that, that they would be doing something that's wrong. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
now that they may be right or wrong, but that's what they're thinking they're doing. Not that they're saying, "Get your crying kid out of here." That's not what they're trying to that's not what they're trying to communicate.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
same thing, probably just based on what Sharon's saying here, it's probably not that congregation is saying we don't we don't want outsiders from our little group to come in
Mm-hmm.
here and to eat with us. That's
Mm-hmm.
probably not what they're saying.
It's not a
Probably what
rejection of others. It's an
they're saying,
establishment
if we
of.
were to do this when we think the New Testament tells us something different, we think Jesus has told us to do something different, we would be doing something that we believe to be wrong.
Mm,
I mean, I think
yeah.
there are a lot of cases where even when I don't agree with the conclusion that somebody's taken, I can really respect it and
Mm,
can say, okay, I see why you take the position that you take. And there are a lot of times where I will say, for instance, I'm not a pacifist. I don't think that all war is
mm,
wrong,
mm-hmm.
but I have some friends who are pacifists that I really admire,
Mm,
and who are really consistent about their viewpoint, which is to say, any use of violence is in contradiction to the Sermon on the Mount. Well, I would rather be with people like that, even though I don't agree
mm,
with their interpretation of what Jesus is saying, than I would be with people who are saying, well, I mean, it's ridiculous to say nonviolence.
mm,
You
mm.
know,
Yeah.
that's even though my position might be closer to that second one, the way that he or she is getting there is not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you could bear with this congregation that way, and just decide whether that's a hill for you to die on or not.
That's a great question from Sharon. Thank you,
Yeah.
Sharon.
Thanks, Sharon. All right. Great question, Sharon. Wonder if you have a question, listener. If so, do it like Sharon did and send us a voice memo. But we're not going to reject you if you don't. But we just would really prefer it. And send it to questions@russellmoore.com, and we'll do our best to take it up here. And we will be here with you next time.